Just closed last week. He wasn't speaking to me specifically, not yet. He was performing for the small gathering of employees who had congregated near the open bar, people too junior to escape but too ambitious to walk away from the CEO's only son. I watched from several feet away, nursing a sparkling water while pretending to examine the art on the wall. 8 bedrooms, he continued, gesturing expansively. Though, honestly, who needs that many? But the wine cellar. He kissed his fingertips dramatically. That's where the real money went. Someone asked a timid question about the price, which was exactly what Dex wanted. Let's just say it has more zeros than most people here will see in their lifetime. His eyes swept the group before landing directly on me. Hey, Penny, come join us. We're talking about real estate. The room seemed to shrink as heads turned my way. 3 years at this investment firm had taught me that Dex only called attention to me when he planned to use me as a prop in his performance of superiority. I was just telling everyone about my new place, he said as I reluctantly approached. What are you paying for that apartment on the east side? Something like $2,000 a month? He knew exactly what neighborhood I lived in because he'd made it his business to know, and to mention it whenever possible. Something like that, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. That's what, about $24,000 a year? He pretended to calculate in his head. So, you'd need to work. Let's see, roughly 200 years to afford my house. He laughed, a sound like expensive silverware clattering down marble stairs. The circle of colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Some found sudden interest in their shoes. Others manufactured polite smiles. Assuming you got yearly raises, maybe only 150 years, he added, eyes gleaming. But hey, that's why some people make the big decisions while others just analyze them. The reference to my recently sidelined promotion stung exactly as he'd intended. 2 weeks ago, I'd been passed over for head analyst in favor of Dex's fraternity brother who'd been with the company all of 3 months. Actually, I said, surprising myself by speaking, I'm quite happy with my financial situation. Dex's perfect eyebrows arched. Are you? Driving that 10-year-old sedan, bringing lunch in paper bags, living in that neighborhood? He emphasized the last word as if describing something stuck to his shoe. I make choices that work for me. Choices? He snorted. Let's be honest. You make the choices available to people who will always work for people like me and my father. That's when something inside me, something that had been bending for 3 long years, finally snapped. Interesting perspective, I said, reaching into my purse. I extracted a single folded document, my latest investment portfolio statement, and placed it on the high top table between us. Perhaps you should check your math. Dex glanced down dismissively, then did a double take. His eyes widened as he scanned the figures. The color drained from his face so quickly, I worried he might faint onto the imported marble floor. This can't be, he stammered, picking up the paper with suddenly unsteady hands. But it is, I said softly. 27% ownership stake in the parent company, compared to your family's 22. I've been buying while you've been spending. The champagne flute trembled in his grip. A droplet spilled over the edge, landing on his custom-tailored sleeve. That's not possible, he whispered, but the panic in his eyes told me he already knew it was true. I leaned closer, speaking just loudly enough for our immediate circle to hear. The shareholders' meeting is next week. I've already spoken with several major investors about restructuring leadership based on actual ability rather than last names. His face contorted with a mixture of shock, rage, and most satisfyingly, fear. You might want to reconsider that yacht you've been talking about, I added. Property taxes on mansions can be brutal on unemployment. I won't lie, if you've been enjoying this intense office showdown so far, you might want to hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this revenge story unfolds. Because trust me, this confrontation is just the beginning of how I systematically dismantled the man who spent years trying to erase me. My name is Penny Wade, and until that moment at the company party, most people underestimated me. That was partially by design. I'm 5'4" with naturally curly hair that refuses to be tamed and a face that looks younger than my 32 years. I don't command attention when I enter rooms. I don't interrupt conversations. I observe, calculate, and wait. I moved to the city 8 years ago with a finance degree and a plan. While classmates chased prestigious addresses and luxury lifestyles, I lived with 3 roommates and worked 60-hour weeks. I clipped coupons while building investment models after midnight. When I finally landed the job at Emerald Investments, I continued living well below my means, not out of necessity, but strategy. What no one at the firm realized was that I'd been systematically investing nearly 70% of my income while learning the market's patterns. I didn't buy designer clothes or weekend getaways. I bought carefully researched stocks, bonds, and real estate investment trusts. While Dex spent $300,000 on a car, I acquired shares that would eventually be worth millions. My first encounter with Dex happened during my initial week. He strolled past my desk, stopped, looked at my computer screen showing complex market analyses, and said, "Cute that you're trying. But instinct for this business is something you're born with, not something you learn." Then he walked away, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and unearned confidence. I might have dismissed him as just another entitled executive's son if not for what happened during my third month. I'd developed an analysis of an emerging market sector that identified 3 undervalued companies poised for explosive growth. After presenting it to my direct supervisor, the report mysteriously disappeared. 2 weeks later, Dex presented the exact same findings to the board, using my charts, my data, but with his name on the cover. "Brilliant insight," the CEO had proclaimed, beaming at his son. "This is why you're on the leadership track." When I tried to speak up, my supervisor pulled me aside. "Let it go," he warned. "His father signs all our paychecks." That became the pattern. My work would vanish, only to reappear under Dex's name. My meeting invitations would be accidentally deleted. My access to key data would be restricted right before important analyses were due. Each time I began gaining recognition, Dex would find a way to step on my professional neck. The worst came when my risk assessment model saved the company from a potentially catastrophic investment. I'd spotted warning signs everyone else missed about a supposedly can't-miss opportunity. My analysis prevented a $50 million loss. The day after implementation, Dex received a public commendation and bonus for his exceptional risk mitigation strategy. That evening, I updated my resume and began networking with former colleagues. But as I contemplated leaving, I noticed something fascinating in the company's financial reports. The parent corporation's stock was significantly undervalued, and the family's ownership percentage had been gradually decreasing as they sold shares to fund expansions. An idea took root. Instead of running, what if I played a longer game? I began systematically acquiring shares through careful planning. Each time Dex arrived in a new sports car or bragged about another luxury purchase, I bought more stock. When he mentioned putting a down payment on his waterfront mansion, I liquidated my other investments and acquired a substantial block of shares that pushed my ownership past the 20% threshold. All while driving my reliable old car, bringing homemade lunches, and living in my modest apartment on the east side. The company never noticed because I purchased through various investment vehicles, all perfectly legal, just strategically complex. While Dex focused on displaying wealth, I focused on acquiring actual control. "You've been awfully quiet lately," Dex remarked about 2 months before the confrontation. "Finally accepting your place in the pecking order?" "Just focused on my work," I'd replied, mentally calculating how many shares I'd purchased that morning. "Smart," he said, patting my shoulder condescendingly. "Know your limitations." I'd smiled politely while thinking about the board meeting I'd soon be leading, the one where his limitations would become painfully apparent to everyone. Standing in the suddenly silent circle of colleagues at the anniversary party, I watched the realization wash over Dex's face. For 3 years, he'd seen me as furniture, a background character in his story of inherited success. Now he was finally seeing me as I truly was, the architect of his downfall. "You can't do this," he hissed, gripping my document so tightly it crumpled. "My father will receive my full restructuring proposal tomorrow morning," I interrupted calmly, "including detailed documentation of how company performance has suffered under nepotistic leadership policies. The board answers to shareholders," I said. And as of last week, I became the largest individual shareholder. I've already spoken with 3 institutional investors who control another 30% combined. They're quite interested in my ideas for increasing profitability through merit-based executive selection. Dex lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You sneaky little—" "I wouldn't finish that sentence," I said quietly, looking pointedly at his hand. "Not with so many witnesses." He released me as if burned, suddenly aware of the circle of wide-eyed colleagues watching this exchange. Behind them, I noticed the CEO entering the room, scanning the crowd for his son. "Your father's here," I said. "Should we share the news with him now, or would you prefer to handle that conversation privately?" Dex's eyes darted toward the entrance, then back to me. In that moment, I saw genuine fear, perhaps for the first time in his privileged life. "This isn't over," he whispered. "Actually," I replied, reclaiming my portfolio statement and returning it to my purse. "It is. But you're right about one thing." I gestured toward the beautiful view of the city skyline visible through the venue's windows. "That house of yours truly is spectacular. I might even make you an offer on it once the price drops. I hear distressed properties can be quite affordable." As I turned to walk away, leaving him standing there with his perfect world crumbling around him, Dex grabbed my shoulder and spun me around, his face contorted with rage. "You will regret this," he growled, loud enough for nearby conversations to halt. "Nobody knows what you're really capable of, but I do." His words sent an unexpected chill through me. What did he mean? What did he know? Before I could respond, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Check your investment accounts again, Penny. I think you'll find some irregularities." A cold wave of uncertainty washed over me. Irregularities? What was he talking about? Before I could demand clarification, Dex's father appeared at his side, clapping a hand on his son's shoulder. "There you are." The CEO's booming voice commanded attention as it always did. "The Phelps Group just arrived. They're eager to hear about your projections for next quarter." Dex's expression transformed instantly, the mask of charming confidence sliding back into place with practiced ease. But as he turned to follow his father, he shot me one last look, a smirk that carried a warning. I stood frozen for several seconds after they departed. My moment of triumph suddenly felt hollow, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. I slipped away from the party, found a quiet corner in the hallway, and pulled out my phone. With trembling fingers, I logged into my brokerage accounts. Everything appeared normal at first glance. My holdings were intact, my ownership percentage unchanged. But when I accessed the transaction history, my heart stuttered. There were anomalies, small but significant discrepancies in the timing of certain purchases, oddities in the routing of funds, peculiar patterns that wouldn't be obvious to anyone not intimately familiar with these accounts. Nothing immediately alarming, but enough to raise questions, if examined closely by financial regulators. How had he known? How had he gained access? And more importantly, what was he planning to do with this information? I leaned against the wall, suddenly dizzy. The champagne I hadn't even drunk seemed to swirl in my head. "Penny, are you okay?" I looked up to see Mira, one of the few colleagues I genuinely trusted, watching me with concern. As head of legal compliance, she had been one of the few people at the firm who had recognized my abilities from the beginning. "Just needed some air," I managed, locking my phone screen. Mira studied me carefully. "I saw what happened with Dex. Word's already spreading about you owning more company stock than the family." "That wasn't supposed to happen yet," I admitted. "I was planning to wait until after the shareholders' meeting next week." "Well, the cat's clawing its way out of the bag now." She glanced back toward the party. "You should know that Arnold just pulled Dex and 3 board members into a side room. They looked intense." Arnold, the CEO, Dex's father, the man who had built this company through aggressive, sometimes questionable tactics. A man who had never lost a business fight in his 40-year career. "I need to leave," I said suddenly, gathering my things. "Penny, wait." Mira caught my arm. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. The Woods family doesn't play by normal rules when they're threatened." I knew she was right. I'd witnessed their ruthlessness for 3 years, always directed at competitors, never at me, because until tonight, I'd never registered as a threat. "Thanks, Mira. I'll call you tomorrow." The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. By the time I reached my apartment, a plan was forming. If Dex had found ways to create irregularities in my investment history, I needed to understand exactly what he'd done and how to counter it. I spent hours combing through records, transaction histories, and account statements. The inconsistencies were subtle, timestamp anomalies on certain transactions, routing numbers that didn't quite match documentation, deposit sequences that could, if viewed through a particular lens, suggest market manipulation. None of it was actually illegal. I'd been meticulous about following regulations. But in the hands of someone motivated to find problems, these discrepancies could trigger investigations, freeze assets, and create enough chaos to derail my plans. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Smart move leaving early. Breakfast tomorrow? 7 a.m. Harbor Cafe. Come alone or don't come at all." No signature, but it could only be from one person. Dex. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the remaining hours strategizing, preparing, and fortifying myself for whatever he might have planned. By dawn, I was exhausted, but resolved. Harbor Cafe was an unassuming diner on the waterfront, the kind of place that served fishermen and dock workers, not finance executives. At 6:55 a.m., I pushed through the door, scanning the nearly empty restaurant until I spotted him in a back booth, wearing sunglasses despite the dim interior lighting. "You look terrible," Dex said as I slid into the seat across from him. "Rough night?" "What did you do to my accounts?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He removed his sunglasses, revealing bloodshot eyes that matched my own. "Straight to business. That's what I've always secretly admired about you, Penny. No games, except you've played nothing but games with me for 3 years. Not games, strategy." He signaled to a waitress, who promptly brought over 2 coffees. "Though I admit, I underestimated you. Severely." "Answer my question." He sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim. "I didn't do anything to your accounts. I simply became aware of certain patterns. Patterns that could look problematic to regulators. Patterns that might raise questions about how a mid-level analyst acquired enough capital to purchase 27% of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I've broken no laws. Of course not. You're too smart for that." He leaned forward. "But investigations are messy, time-consuming things. Assets get frozen. Reputations get questioned. Even when you're eventually cleared, the damage is done." My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. You made a bold move last night. I'm making one this morning." He slid a folder across the table. "Open it." Inside was a single sheet of paper, a term sheet, outlining an offer to purchase my shares at 15% above market value, contingent upon my immediate resignation and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. "That's more money than most people see in a lifetime," Dex said quietly. "You could leave today, buy your own mansion on the water, never work another day in your life." I stared at the numbers, calculating quickly. It was an enormous sum, life-changing money by any standard. And if I refuse? His expression hardened. "Then my father makes a call to the Securities Exchange Commission this afternoon about unusual trading patterns he's noticed. He's golf partners with one of the commissioners, you know, and while they investigate, the board will certainly need to postpone any decisions about leadership restructuring." "That's illegal. It's blackmail. It's business," Dex corrected. "And it's the choice in front of you. Walk away wealthy, or fight a battle that will drag on for years with no guaranteed outcome." I thought about my carefully constructed plan, now threatening to collapse, about the countless nights I'd worked while Dex partied on yachts, about watching him take credit for my ideas, my analyses, my contributions. "You want my answer now?" "By the end of business today, the offer expires at 5 p.m. I closed the folder and stood up. "I'll be in touch, Penny." He caught my wrist as I turned to leave. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've proven your point. You outsmarted me. Take the win and the money." I pulled my arm from his grasp. "Unlike you, Dex, this was never about the money for me." The morning air felt crisp against my face as I left the cafe. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. 9 a.m. meeting with the head of the research department, one of several I'd scheduled for today, to begin building support for my restructuring proposal. By noon, I'd met with 3 department heads, all of whom had responded with varying degrees of surprise to my revelation about ownership stakes. None had committed to supporting my plan, but none had dismissed it outright either. Progress, but not victory. Returning to my desk, I found a small box with no card. Inside was a single chess piece, a white queen, and a note that read, "Even queens can be taken." The handwriting was unmistakably Arnold's. The intimidation tactics were escalating. First Dex with his buyout offer and thinly veiled threats. Now his father with chess metaphors. The message was clear. They were unified against me, prepared to use their considerable power to maintain control. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt a curious calm settling over me. 3 years of watching, learning, and planning had prepared me for this moment. I knew the Woods family better than they realized. Their tactics, their weaknesses, their blind spots. What they didn't know was that I had anticipated this exact scenario. At 2:30 p.m., I met Mira in the building's courtyard, away from prying eyes and ears. "They're scared," she said after I recounted the morning's events. "I've never seen Arnold rattled before, but he was barking at everyone in the executive meeting. Something about accelerating the Westlake acquisition. The Westlake acquisition. Of course. It was the cornerstone of the company's growth strategy for the next 5 years. A deal that would either cement Emerald Investments as an industry leader or sink it if mishandled. A deal that Dex had been showcasing as his personal triumph, though I knew he understood little about its complexities. When's the final signing? I asked. Tomorrow afternoon. The Westlake team flies in at noon. 24 hours. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more dangerous. Mira, I need copies of all the Westlake documentation. The real versions, not the sanitized summaries Dex has been circulating. She hesitated. That's way beyond my clearance level, but not beyond Arnold's assistance level. The one you've been dating for the past 6 months. Her eyes widened. How did you? I notice things others don't. It's both my gift and my curse. Mira studied me for a long moment. What are you planning, Penny? Something risky. Something that could either save this company or end my career. Maybe both. That doesn't answer my question. I smiled for the first time that day. No, it doesn't. But the less you know right now, the better. Plausible deniability and all that. She sighed. I'll see what I can do. But Penny, whatever you're thinking, the Woods family has destroyed people for less than what you did last night. I'm counting on that, I replied. Their predictability when threatened is the one advantage I have. Back at my desk, I opened a secure messaging app on my phone and sent a brief text to a contact I hadn't communicated with in months. Ready to move on Westlake. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Bring everything we discussed. The response came almost immediately. Confirmed, package prepared as requested. I took a deep breath and turned my attention to Dex's buyout offer. The deadline, 5 p.m., loomed just hours away. I needed to respond, but not in the way they expected. At 4:45 p.m., I walked deliberately to Dex's corner office, folder in hand. His assistant tried to stop me, but I pushed past her, entering without knocking. Dex was on the phone but ended the call abruptly when he saw me. Cutting it close, aren't we? I placed the folder on his desk. My response. He opened it eagerly, then frowned at the single sheet inside. This is blank. Exactly. His face darkened. Don't play games with me, Penny. The offer expires in 15 minutes. I'm not accepting or rejecting. Not yet. That's not how this works. Actually, it is. I perched on the edge of his desk, invading his space deliberately, because I have something you want, and you have something I want. And what might that be? His voice dripped with condescension. I want the Westlake deal. He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. You're delusional. That's $1 billion acquisition that I've been orchestrating for a year. 9 months, I corrected. And you've been orchestrating the public-facing aspects while others handled the substance. I want lead position on the final negotiations and integration plan. Absolutely not. My father would never. Your father will agree if you tell him to. Because the alternative is me walking into tomorrow's signing meeting with evidence that the Westlake valuation is inflated by 30% due to accounting practices that border on fraudulent. The color drained from his face. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your emails. There should be one from Westlake's CFO that arrived about. I glanced at my watch. 3 minutes ago. He turned to his computer, clicking rapidly before freezing at whatever he saw on the screen. How did you? Like I said, I notice things others don't, including weaknesses in the Westlake financials that your team overlooked because you were too fixated on closing the deal quickly. His eyes narrowed. What's your angle here? If the deal falls apart, your shares take the same hit as everyone else's. My angle is fixing the deal before it destroys this company, but I need to be in the room to do it. And if I refuse? I stood up. Then your father makes his call to the SEC. I release my findings on Westlake to the board and the business press, and we see whose career survives the ensuing chaos. Maybe neither of ours. Maybe just mine. The silence between us stretched taut as a wire. Finally, Dex reached for his phone. Dad, we need to talk about tomorrow's Westlake meeting. There's been a development. As he outlined my proposal to his father, I watched his face cycle through anger, calculation, and finally, reluctant acceptance. When he hung up, his expression was unreadable. Congratulations, he said flatly. You'll have your seat at the table tomorrow, but this changes nothing about our larger situation. I disagree, I replied, moving toward the door. It changes everything, because what Dex didn't know, what he couldn't possibly suspect, was that tomorrow's meeting was just one piece of a much larger plan. a plan that had begun the moment I first watched him take credit for my work 3 years ago. That night brought no sleep. I spent hours reviewing the Westlake documents Mira had somehow obtained, confirming what I'd already suspected. The acquisition target had systematically inflated their value through accounting maneuvers that, while not technically illegal, skirted dangerously close to the line. If Emerald completed the purchase at the current valuation, we'd be overpaying by nearly 30%, a mistake that would drain capital reserves and potentially trigger a liquidity crisis within 18 months. More importantly, I discovered something the Woods family had missed entirely. Westlake's founder, Gilbert Hayes, didn't actually want to sell to Emerald. He'd been maneuvered into the deal by his board and had been looking for an escape hatch for months. That was the leverage I needed. Morning came with a text from Dex. Meeting moved to 10 a.m. Executive boardroom. Don't be late. They were trying to throw me off balance by changing the schedule. I'd expected as much. I dressed with particular care, a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without flashiness, my most comfortable heels, minimal jewelry. Today wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about focus and execution. When I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Colleagues stared as I walked through the main floor, whispers following in my wake. News of my confrontation with Dex had clearly spread. Mira intercepted me by the elevators. Arnold's been in the executive boardroom since 7 a.m. with the general counsel, she murmured. Whatever you're planning, they're planning something too. I'm counting on it, I replied as the elevator doors opened. The executive floor was unusually quiet when I stepped out. Arnold's assistant avoided eye contact as I approached the boardroom. Through the glass walls, I could see them waiting. Arnold at the head of the table, Dex to his right, 3 board members, the general counsel, and the chief financial officer. No sign yet of the Westlake team. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. "Ah, Penny," Arnold said, his voice carrying the forced joviality of a predator playing with its food. Prompt as always. "Please, join us." I took the only available seat, at the far end of the table, as far from the action as possible, a deliberate placement to minimize my influence. "Before our guests arrive," Arnold continued, "I believe we should clarify expectations." He slid a document toward me. "This outlines the parameters of your participation today." I glanced at the paper without touching it. A muzzle disguised as a protocol agreement, restrictions on what questions I could ask, what topics I could raise, essentially reducing me to an observer. "I won't be signing that," I said calmly. Arnold's smile tightened. "Then I'm afraid you won't be participating." "Actually, I will." I opened my laptop. "Because in approximately 3 minutes, the Westlake team will arrive. And unless I'm in this meeting with full participation rights, they'll receive this email detailing the 30% valuation discrepancy I've identified in their financials." Dex leaned forward. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't torpedo the deal." "I'm not torpedoing anything. I'm saving this company from a catastrophic overpayment." I turned my laptop so they could see the drafted email, addressed to the entire Westlake executive team, with comprehensive documentation attached. The CFO reached for the laptop. "Let me see that." For the next 2 minutes, he scrolled through my analysis, his expression growing increasingly grave. Finally, he looked up at Arnold. "She's right. These numbers don't align with what we've been working from." Arnold's face flushed with anger. "Why wasn't this caught earlier?" The CFO glanced uncomfortably at Dex. "The financial review team reported to me," Dex interrupted, "and we thoroughly vetted everything. This is clearly a last-minute attempt to disrupt the deal." "Is it?" I pulled out a printed copy of my analysis. "Check the metadata on the files. I identified these discrepancies 3 months ago." Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door opened, and the receptionist announced the arrival of the Westlake team. What followed was 2 hours of the most intense negotiation I'd ever experienced. The Westlake executives, LEB, led by their CEO, not the founder, presented their company as a flawless acquisition target with limitless growth potential. Dex and Arnold nodded along enthusiastically, while I waited, watching Gilbert Hayes, the founder, who sat silently at the edge of his team. When the presentation concluded, Arnold began his prepared remarks about synergies and strategic alignment. I caught Hayes' eye and gave a slight nod. He checked his watch, then whispered something to his colleague. Before we proceed, the Westlake CEO suddenly announced, "Our team needs a brief recess, perhaps 30 minutes?" Arnold looked annoyed at the interruption, but agreed. As everyone stood to take a break, I slipped out of the room and made my way to a small conference room down the hall where a man in his 60s waited, Gilbert Hayes himself, having quietly separated from his team. "You were right," he said without preamble. "They're rushing this through despite my objections. And you've confirmed the discrepancies in the valuation?" He nodded grimly. "Your analysis was correct. The growth projections are built on contracts that aren't yet finalized and cost reductions that aren't realistic. Then let's proceed as discussed." When the meeting reconvened, I noticed an immediate change in the room's energy. Hayes had returned to his seat, but now sat more upright, more engaged. The Westlake CEO kept glancing at him nervously. Arnold was midway through outlining the integration timeline when I finally spoke up. "Before we go further," I said, my voice cutting through his presentation, "I'd like to address the valuation concerns directly." Dex shot me a warning look, but I continued. "My analysis shows that Westlake's current valuation is inflated by approximately 30% due to several accounting approaches that, while technically permissible, don't reflect operational reality." The room fell silent. The Westlake CEO started to object, but Hayes raised his hand, stopping him. "Ms. Wade is correct," Hayes said quietly. "And as the founder and still largest individual shareholder of Westlake, I cannot in good conscience allow this transaction to proceed under these terms." Chaos erupted. The Westlake CEO argued that Hayes didn't speak for the company. Arnold and Dex tried to salvage the situation, suggesting we table the valuation discussion and focus on strategic alignment. The general counsel whispered urgently to Arnold. I waited until the noise subsided before speaking again. "I propose an alternative structure," I said, opening a folder I'd prepared. "A revised valuation reflecting actual performance, with an earn-out provision tied to achieving the growth metrics Westlake has projected." Hayes nodded approvingly. "That seems fair. If our projections are accurate, as my executive team insists, then the full value will be realized." "This is highly irregular," the Westlake CEO sputtered. "We had an agreement in principle." "Based on incomplete information," I countered, sliding copies of my analysis to everyone at the table. "If anyone disagrees with my findings, I welcome their specific objections." For the next hour, we dissected the numbers. With each question, each challenge, it became increasingly clear that my analysis was sound. The Westlake executives grew more uncomfortable, while Hayes became more engaged, eventually moving to sit directly across from me. By early afternoon, we had the framework of a revised deal, one that protected Emerald from overpayment while giving Westlake fair compensation with upside potential if their projections proved accurate. As the details were being finalized, Arnold suddenly stood. "Let's take a short break. Dex, Penny, a word in my office." Once behind closed doors, Arnold's cordial facade vanished. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Saving this company about $300 million, I replied evenly. "You're undermining months of work," Dex snapped, "making us look unprepared and divided." "No, I'm correcting a critical oversight that would have damaged this company irreparably. An oversight that occurred under your supervision, Dex." Arnold stepped between us. "Enough. The situation is what it is. We'll complete this revised deal, but make no mistake, this power play will have consequences." "It already has," I said, reaching into my bag and retrieving a sealed envelope. "This is for you." Arnold took it warily. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter from the board of directors calling for an emergency session at 4 p.m. today. At the bottom were the signatures of 7 board members, a majority. Arnold's face went pale. "How did you—" "While you and Dex were focused on intimidating me, I was speaking with board members about my concerns regarding the Westlake acquisition. They were particularly interested in how such significant valuation issues could have been missed or ignored." "This is a coup," Dex sputtered. "No, it's corporate governance," I corrected. "Something this company has been lacking under your family's leadership." Arnold studied the letter again. "This meeting, what's the agenda?" "Reconsideration of the executive leadership structure in light of recent events," I quoted from memory, "and review of certain corporate governance concerns raised by major shareholders." The realization of what was happening finally dawned on Dex's face. "You played us?" he whispered. "The whole time. You let us think this was about getting you a seat at the table for one deal." "When it was actually about the table itself," I confirmed. "Yes." Arnold slumped into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. "Why not just vote your shares? You have enough to force changes." because I wanted the board to reach these conclusions independently, to see for themselves the problems with how this company has been managed. At 4 p.m. sharp, the boardroom filled again, this time with every board member, each looking somber and determined. I sat quietly at the back while the chairman called the meeting to order. What followed was as clinical as it was devastating. The board methodically reviewed the Westlake situation, questioning Dex in particular about oversight failures. They examined patterns of decision-making that prioritized speed over diligence, relationships over qualifications. Then came the vote. By 5:17 p.m., Arnold had been transitioned to Chairman Emeritus, a ceremonial role with no operational authority. Dex had been removed from all executive positions, though retained as a strategic advisor reporting to the new leadership team. And I had been named Interim Chief Strategy Officer while an executive search was conducted for a permanent CEO. As the meeting adjourned, Dex approached me, his expression a mixture of rage and bewilderment. "How long have you been planning this?" he demanded. "Since the day you took credit for my risk assessment model," I answered honestly. That was when I realized that as long as the Woods family controlled this company, true merit would never be recognized. So that's what this was? Revenge for wounded pride? No, Dex. This was about building something better than what your family created. Something that rewards excellence rather than birthright. He shook his head slowly. "You won't last. You don't have the connections, the relationships that built this place." "You're right," I acknowledged. "I don't have your connections, but I have something more valuable, the respect of the people who actually do the work here." As if on cue, Mira appeared at the doorway, accompanied by department heads from across the company. People who had watched silently for years as talent was overlooked in favor of nepotism. People who had received my quietly circulated analyses over the past year, documenting how the company's performance had suffered under entitled leadership. Dex looked from them to me, finally understanding the full scope of what had happened. "My house," he said suddenly. "You mentioned buying it when the price drops. Did I?" I smiled. "That was just a metaphor, Dex. I have no interest in your house. My apartment suits me perfectly." "Then what do you want? You've taken my job, my reputation, my future here." "I want exactly what I've always wanted, for this company to recognize and reward actual ability, for it to become a place where someone like me can succeed without having to orchestrate a boardroom coup." His face hardened. "You think this is the end? My family still owns 22% of this company." "True, but the board now understands the difference between ownership and leadership, between inheriting power and earning it." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "By the way, Dex, your threat about irregularities in my investment accounts? My attorneys have already addressed those concerns with the SEC. Turns out they were quite interested in who might have attempted to tamper with those records." The color drained from his face. "You can't prove anything. I don't need to. The investigation will do that." I smiled, not unkindly. "Perhaps you should speak with the general counsel. I hear he's taking meetings all afternoon." 3 weeks later, the company announced its permanent leadership structure. I declined the CEO position, preferring to remain as Chief Strategy Officer, where my analytical skills could be best utilized. The Westlake acquisition closed successfully under the revised terms, saving the company hundreds of millions while still giving Westlake fair value and upside potential. Dex resigned from his advisory role after the SEC opened a formal investigation into potential securities violations. Arnold retreated to his vacation home in the islands, issuing a press release about pursuing new opportunities. And me? I finally bought a new car. Nothing flashy, just newer and more reliable than my old sedan. I stayed in my East Side apartment, though I did upgrade to a slightly larger unit in the same building. I continued bringing lunch from home most days, investing the majority of my increased salary just as I always had. Because it was never about the mansions or the yachts or the status symbols. It was about creating a company where excellence matters more than last names. Where people like me, who notice things others miss, who work while others boast, who build while others spend, can thrive on their own terms. Oh, and that house Dex was so proud of? It did go on the market 6 months later, selling for 30% below his purchase price. I didn't buy it, but Gilbert Hayes did, after I introduced him to my real estate agent. Some revenge isn't about destruction, it's about reconstruction. Building something better from the ruins of what deserved to fall. If you've made it to the end of this story, you might be wondering if there's a lesson here. Maybe it's about patience, or strategy, or the quiet power of observation. Or maybe it's simply that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one they should fear the most. Either way, if this journey of calculated revenge satisfied something in you, hit that subscribe button. Because understanding how power really works and how it can change hands when you least expect it is a story worth following.